All right, West Virginia fans, moving parts. It was a very busy day in regards to former West Virginia Mountaineers. So, we're going to break down the latest news with Jordan Scruggs, Cam Vaughn, and Trey Eaglestaff. We'll also talk about the AP Top 25 poll tonight that came out today, and we'll break down who West Virginia plays and what it means for the Mountaineers. Well, we'll also talk about the patches, the Big 12 monster patches, and some of the mishaps recently from the Big 12 conference. So I have a jam-packed show, and we're going to get right into it. Before we do, if you're a West Virginia fan, please remember to like and subscribe to the show. We really appreciate all the support. That being said, let's get into it. So let's get into this one first, and that's the Jordan Scruggs news. This news broke a few minutes ago about Jordan Scruggs, and he has committed to Maryland, his reps told Pete Nakos. He was granted an injunction today against the NCAA on Monday for a final year of eligibility and has been in the portal since January. So Scruggs is a guy that's been on the show before. He's a friend of the show. Have a lot of respect for him. He's a really cool dude, and I wish it would have worked out this year with him at West Virginia, but ultimately going to have a change of scenery for Scruggs and go to the Big Ten with Maryland. And he had a court date a few weeks ago, but the next process of that step was today, and I had this date circled on my calendar because I knew either way we'd probably hear news about Scruggs, whether he was coming back to West Virginia or if he was going to be looking to play elsewhere. But the news broke today that he's going to go to Maryland. So my initial thoughts on this is Maryland's getting a talented player in Scruggs, right? We saw what Scruggs did last year for West Virginia. He had 33 total tackles. He had one forced fumble and had that pick six versus Colorado. I felt like he was getting better as the season went along, and I felt like he played with a lot of energy, and I really liked Scruggs on the Mountaineer team. I thought he was a really solid player and could have helped the Mountaineers. But then things with him and with West Virginia started to not progress as fast as I thought they would when he made the announcement that he was going to be eligible to play a few weeks ago. There was no news of him going back into camp. And as this thing kind of transpired on and on and on, I kind of had some question marks of, would this happen for West Virginia and getting Scruggs back in the fold for West Virginia? And then today, obviously, we see he transfers to Maryland. And, you know, I think for this, he's going to be an easy guy to root for. I know he's going to a rival school, but Maryland is not on the schedule for West Virginia. So I have no problem rooting for Scruggs. He probably had to do what was best for him with the opportunity to be made, you know. Now, his court case was a little bit different, too. You know, he's not necessarily a 5-for-5 deal guy. He already played 5 seasons, but one of those seasons was in JUCO, so he was trying to get that season back ultimately. And I think if he had a regular 5-for-5 deal, West Virginia would have been probably more aggressive in pursuing him. But I think West Virginia had some like PTSD from last year with waiver situations and getting guys late in the fold. So I wasn't sure if they were really trying to gamble on that. And then they went out and got Jason Chambers back, and he's back in the fold. So I think once we saw Jason Chambers being added, West Virginia already added a cornerback at that position. So I felt like it probably made sense that Jordan would transfer, you know. So again, I wish him luck. You know, I have a lot of respect for him and hope he really does well. But ultimately, he had to do the best decision for him. I'm not even sure if West Virginia has a roster spot available. I know they talked about maybe having 1 or 2 available. It's going to be interesting to see what West Virginia does with this spot. But ultimately, he is going away. Coop said, "Yo," he said, "Chambers is better than Jordan anyway." I think you know, Chambers started 12 games last year. I think last year Chambers, I said this on Kuz's show last night, Chambers was the surprise of camp last year because he started all 12 games. You know, he wasn't initially a starter in a lot of people's eyes, but then ultimately leveled up. But I think, again, Scruggs is still a solid player, and I would love to have him in the fold. I think he's very comparable to Chambers, in my opinion. But ultimately, you could debate that all you want. He's not going to be in a Mountaineer uniform this year. He's going to be in Maryland. So, again, best of luck to him. I hope he does well. But ultimately, it's time to move on with the guys that are going to be here. Let's talk about Cam Vaughn here. This news broke today. And we heard rumblings about this, but nothing official, right? We saw the Twitter rumors and the social media rumors, but we did not see anything official until today. And usually when there's smoke, there's fire. So when there's rumblings and as loud as it got, you had a feeling this was eventually going to come down. And it did today for former West Virginia receiver Cam Vaughn. And you can see here the comments that were made from Mario Cristobal today on WQAM radio in Miami. He said, "You make moves that are strictly for the betterment of the team." Wow. He said, "You want to work for everybody. You work endless days and nights so it can work. And then there comes a time where decisions have to be made. And that's just the way it is. It's a process that nothing or nobody gets in the way of being 1-0. In terms of when you make moves that are strictly for the betterment of the team. That's why they were made." Wow. I think that speaks volumes to how bad the situation probably got here in Miami. To say a guy, it's just better to not be on the team at all, it is pretty eye-opening. And for Vaughn, if he has a mature approach about this, if he takes it as a learning opportunity, it could be a learning experience for him as far as where his role is in college football. When you make a decision to transfer from a Power 4 program to another Power 4 program, you better be confident in your skills, and you better know for sure that that gamble is going to pay off, because it is a gamble, right? How many times as West Virginia fans have we seen it time in and time again that someone leaves to try to go to a bigger brand school and it doesn't work out? It happens all the time. We saw with Treysen Miller, right? Who was like an all Big 12 corner, never saw the field at Auburn. His career plummeted, gone. Winston Wright, different story because he was injured a little bit, but didn't exactly work out for him. Look at Traylon Ray. Again, I know injuries, but Traylon Ray hasn't sniffed the field at Ole Miss. He was a guy that had a lot of promise at West Virginia. Now, for all those guys, it also works for some people, right? Tyke Smith and Mesidor, Daryl Porter were able to go to those schools and make some noise and have solid careers. I mean, some of those guys made really high NFL draft picks, Smith and Mesidor. So, Trotter worked out for her, right? But guys like CJ Donaldson, not necessarily, right? CJ went undrafted. So it's a huge gamble. And I think the question is it worth it to transfer? I know the grass always seems to be greener, but you look at guys in their careers and you just hurt your own career. I mean, think about Cam Vaughn real quick. Last year, there's one thing you can't doubt about Cam Vaughn. This guy is talented. You saw it at Jack State. You saw it at West Virginia. This guy is talented. I mean, look at the numbers he put up last year: 35 catches, 541 yards, and 4 touchdowns, averaged 15.5 yards a catch. He was extremely talented on the football field for West Virginia with a really bad supporting cast around him. Let's just call it what it is. The offensive line couldn't get out of their own way. You were down to your 4th and 5th string running back and quarterback, and he still put up some decent numbers in the Big 12 after being the number 1 receiver. Could you think, if he had the mature approach and he came back and bought into the system, what he could do with Jaden Bray paired up with him and having Michael Hawkins Jr. at quarterback possibly this year and a better offensive line? Those numbers could go crazy. You would be in a good spot. You're already in a familiar coaching staff and someone that would trust you in Rich Rod. But ultimately, I think what happened at that Texas Tech game was eye-opening last year. It's probably bad because I did YouTube shorts a few times of bold takes about Cam Vaughn, how West Virginia needed to retain him. Because up until the Texas Tech game, you heard rumblings about things, but for what he brought, I felt he was more valuable being on the team than not being on the team, just from what he brought. He was the most explosive player on the offense last year, and you would have loved to retain him. But then after the Texas Tech game happened and you saw that on TV, it was hard to ignore, especially for a coaching staff that praises themselves on hard edge. They say if you're a loafer, you're a traitor, and it's unacceptable. And then on the last game of the season, instead of trying to make a tackle, you kind of show up your quarterback for making a poor throw, and you walk off the field, and that's the lasting memory you're going to have as a West Virginia fan. And then you go to Miami where you think that you're going to have a big role, but then reality sets in that there's really talented players at Miami, and you're just not in the plans. And I think, it kind of goes back to what Rich Rodriguez said about playing a bunch of players. Rich Rod has said time in and time again that he wants to play the most players in the country because he wants everyone to be happy. He wants people to stay. He wants them to have a role and be involved. When you're not involved, how is your attitude going to change when you're not the number one receiver? When you're not on the two deep? Your attitude is going to change the way you approach things, right? And it just got to the point, it sounds like for Mario Cristobal, like he said, it was strictly for the betterment of the team to not have the negative energy in that locker room anymore. So ultimately, Cam Vaughn's going to be looking for a new spot to play. I believe he could go and transfer somewhere and play, but again, the clock's ticking. I'm not sure how that works. It's all very confusing to me what the portal rules are if you get dismissed from your team. But ultimately, Cam Vaughn is looking for a new home today, and it's surprising, but it's also not surprising based on what we saw last year. Let's see if we have any comments here about Cam Vaughn or the things here. Trey Edwards said just popped in, so I don't know if you mentioned it, but Scooter Scruggs is in Maryland now. Yes, Trey, I talked about that on the opening of the show. Scooter Scruggs is in Maryland right now. Wish him the best. Friend of the show, did interviews with him on the show, kept in touch with him, wished him good luck today. Just kind of a situation where probably best for him to get a new landing spot after not being in camp and just adding Chambers. It just makes sense for him to look for a new spot. So we did address it, but thank you for asking that question. WVU for us said, let's go Mountaineers. Coop said Hudson Clement should have stayed. Yeah, but you know what? Hudson Clement has put up some decent numbers at Illinois. I know he'd definitely be more of a fan favorite in this program because he's an in-state kid and we love this story. But ultimately, change of coach and he moves on, and it is what it is. The WVU for us said 11-1 first round college football playoff. I would love that. Coop said 10-2. Coop said Cam Vaughn, he should come back here. At this point, he knows the playbook. All right, let's talk about that. Let's have a debate real quick since we're on the topic of Cam Vaughn. Would you want him back as Mountaineer fans? And based on what we saw last year at the end of the Texas Tech game, and based on what Mario Cristobal said, they're better off not having him. I'm not sure if it's worth it, to be honest with you. Again, you talk about Rich Rodriguez, and one of the things he has preached all offseason, and since he's been here, is getting the locker room culture right. You need to have the right guys and build that culture. What does it say about your team if you have a guy like Cam Vaughn who walked off the field last year and didn't give it his all? And we all saw it. Shelton Gibson called him out. Everyone saw that, kind of trolled the fan base that he was going to come back and didn't come back. And then he gets kicked off Miami. And then all of a sudden he's looking for a home and we take him back. I'm not sure if that's how Rich Rod rolls. And I'm not sure what kind of message that sends to your locker room. It almost is counterproductive of what you preach to your players. So yeah, would I love a talent like Cam Vaughn back? Yeah, I would love his talent back. But is it worth it? And you got to take a chance on the guys that have been here, man. You have some talent in this room. You have potential in this room, right? You absolutely do. If you talk about Prince Strong, Jaden Bray, now there's some question marks because they're injuries, but they're talented. I'd rather see what Teron Francis can do, right? I mean, let's face it. Cam Vaughn last year came from Jack State, put up good numbers, but let's not forget about Teron Francis, who's a 4-star LSU guy that just didn't play in his first year, but he's still a young, raw guy. The ceiling might be higher with Teron Francis. Let's give DJ Epps a shot, who put the time in and put the work in at Troy as a walk-on and then had big numbers last year and now is in the Power 4 and has done and said all the right things. Let's give those guys a chance instead of trying to recycle a guy that kind of quit on the team last year. That's just my opinion. We have some other comments. Totally agree. Huddy should have stayed. I seriously doubt they want Vaughn back. Yeah, I'd be shocked. It just doesn't seem how Rich Rod is. Coop said, if you can play football, I don't care. I'll take him back. I mean, I don't know. I disagree. I wouldn't. At what cost? If you have Cam Vaughn back, does it win you that many more games, especially for a run-first offense? I think you have to have confidence in what you have in the room. I really do. He needs a good coach to teach him for real. Mario Cristobal and Rich Rod are good coaches, and it didn't work with those guys. I welcome him back if he admits his faults and wants to be a better player from this point. Yeah, but how I think Vaughn might have to do some soul searching here and really just take some time off from football. Do you think he's going to mature enough in a week to apologize and come back to the Mountaineers? And I don't know. I'd say go find another opportunity. That's just me. I mean, you got again, people let me know, but I would say that wide receiver room with Bray, Vaughn, Epps would be crazy. Yeah, I mean, there is a chance, but again, I'm taking the bet on Schron and Francis and Niter. I think you could replace that production. I think if Schron stays healthy, it's not crazy to think that Schron could be a better player than Cam Vaughn. I truly believe that if you look at size and speed, he just has to stay healthy. Same thing with Teron Francis, way higher regarded recruit coming out of high school than Vaughn was. Vaughn was originally a quarterback. So to me, that's where I would be. Not many receivers jump and one hand catch. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like Odell Beckham. You know, it's funny because I was watching the highlights last night with my wife because I'm a Giants fan, and Odell's back in the fold for the Giants, it seems like, and we were watching the old Odell highlights, and I'm like, man, he was such an extreme talent. He probably had more talent than anyone I've seen in a Giant receiver room, but ultimately his immaturity led him to get off the team and go to the Browns, and it just wasn't worth it at the time. I see similar things here. You can't teach talent. And again, I was the guy last year. If you go back on YouTube Shorts, type in Cam Vaughn, you will find my YouTube Shorts of me saying, pay the man, bring him back. But as things have progressed and what this coaching staff has told you, and they have told you time in and time again that nothing is more important than the culture. And what are you saying about your culture if you welcome a guy like this back? I don't know. In my opinion, is a bad apple amongst the bunch. He'd ruin camaraderie in the locker room. I agree. I mean, what would it say? Like, how would Schron feel? How would Francis feel if they brought a bring back because he got kicked off his team? And again, after he walked off the team last year, he quit in a game. That's what he did, right? I know kids make mistakes, but ultimately actions have consequences sometimes, and this is one of them. And it's not like, Miami went great. Miami literally said, we are better off just cutting ties and not having him on the team. So how much is he worth to West Virginia? Again, I think you have a really good receiver room with a lot of good dudes in it, man. You talk about Jaden Bray and his maturity, and Jaden Bray's a guy that has battled through adversity and said all the right things, an outstanding citizen of the program, a great spokesman for the person, for the program, I should say. That's the guys I want to ride with, right? And you roll the dice with those guys and you see where the cards fall, right? That's just my opinion, all right? But anyway, let's talk about Trey Eaglestaff. This is going to be another hotly debated thing. So it was official today that West Virginia guard Trey Eaglestaff has officially entered the portal per Pete Nakos. Trey Eaglestaff plans to enter the transfer portal. His agency told On3 the 6'6" senior averaged 9.8 points and 4.6 rebounds per game this past season, is exploring a 5th year of eligibility. Now, I think, again, it's one of those situations that I don't feel any type of way about this. I think it's probably better for the program and better for Eaglestaff to kind of cut ties and for him to get a fresh start. I think the fan base's mind was kind of made up on Eaglestaff based on last year. I think there was times where he came up a little bit small and you were expecting bigger things from him, and he had flashes. There's no doubt. He wasn't a god-awful, terrible player. And if he was back on the team, I'd say, okay, like, that's fine. Like, I'd be with it. But I also can understand that, like, I also don't feel a type of certain way if he's off the team either. It's just kind of at that point. Again, he averaged 9.8 points per game, which isn't bad, but, you see the scoring output that he had at North Dakota at 18.9 and 14.4. It didn't really come close to that. And that was disappointing because we saw the potential. We saw what he did against Alabama and going crazy at North Dakota. And we thought that he would be, the scoring output from him would be huge. And then when West Virginia struggled offensively last year and got off to the slow starts, I think he took a big brunt of that because people were like, where is Eaglestaff? What is going on? I think a lot of people were disappointed in his production. And again, I think it's just better off for him and better off for West Virginia to kind of cut ties. West Virginia's basketball team's in a really good spot. Their roster's in a really good spot, especially after you get Lorient and you possibly get Javen Buchanan. This team has expectations, and I think ultimately with Eaglestaff gone, it doesn't hurt those expectations at all. And I think a lot of the fan base today was kind of happy that he was gone. And I saw that people celebrating it. I wasn't going to celebrate it. Again, I think he's a good player, but I think ultimately it just didn't work out at West Virginia. It could have worked out if in a year or two of him, but I don't think West Virginia want to roll the dice again. I don't think Eaglestaff want to roll the dice again with that. And it's ultimately looking for a new home. We have a comment here said, Rich is building a culture. What Cam brings doesn't fit the culture. Yeah, it's exactly what I said about Cam Vaughn. Again, with someone that talks about building the culture, building the locker room as the most important thing. And it takes years to do that, and they're trying to do that again this year. When you look at all the new players they brought in, that they have to do it again this year. And you don't want to do that year in and year out. And ultimately, if you're a loafer, you're a trader, they said, film doesn't lie. People are going to remember that forever. And ultimately, I just don't think it's going to happen. All right, let's see. Let's talk about some football here because football season's almost here. Let's talk about this AP top 25 poll. It came out today, guys, and some interesting stuff off of it. So we have Ohio State at 1, Oregon 2, Georgia 3, Notre Dame 4, Texas 5, Indiana, Miami, A&M, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, LSU, Texas Tech, Alabama, BYU, USC, Michigan, Washington, Penn State, SMU, Tennessee, Utah, Iowa, Houston, Louisville, and Missouri, right? And West Virginia is going to play, based on this poll, Texas Tech this year, which we know is going to be a very tough game, the most challenging game on the season, at least as it stands now. Utah, which is, it's interesting that they're in the AP top 25. I think that's brand biased a little bit because they do have a lot to replace on the offensive line, and they're replacing a good part of their coaching staff. And then Houston is 23rd. That should make you feel good as West Virginia fans, right? The top 10 is really tough. I would think that West Virginia would have a tough time beating anyone really in the top 12. But once you get to like 17, 18, you could get in that ballpark, right? I mean, they beat Houston last year with a depleted roster on the road. So that should be a confidence boost for you. And you get Houston at home this year. And then others receiving votes, Arizona got some votes, TCU, Oklahoma State, and Virginia. So let's talk about a few of these things, right? Oklahoma State's a really tough team to gauge. I can see why they got votes because they are exciting on paper when you look at the guys they're bringing in from North Texas, but I'm really glad they weren't in the top 25. To me, you have to prove it and play some games first and prove that you can do it on this level. Would it surprise me if they did? No, I think they're talented, but ultimately you have to prove it first. Virginia is an interesting one. I think they got one vote today when this came out. Virginia is a team that won a lot of games last year, but they won a lot of games close. And you know how college football works. Just because you win a bunch of games close one year does not necessarily mean that's going to translate the next year. They've retained a lot of their roster. They should be talented, but that's going to be an interesting game. But ultimately, this is the AP top 25 poll. And again, it'd be nice, man, if West Virginia, man, can get back in this poll at some point this season. It's been way too long, man. It's been, since Will Greer's year that they've made it. It was in 2018, when they made it the last time. So it's been quite some time that they've made the top 25 poll. And if you go out and you have a hot start to the season, you take care of business the first two games, you beat Virginia, you beat Oklahoma State. I don't think it's crazy, depending on what happens, that West Virginia can get back in this AP poll. So if they have a hot start and start off 4-5-0, maybe they could break that drought. But I know as West Virginia fans, that needs to get that milestone, that drought needs to end sooner than later because it's been way too long. And our football program is too proud to be that way. Said Washington might be a little scary. Yeah, the Big Ten's interesting. Washington's kind of that wild card team. It's kind of like a team that you never know what to expect, and you have to bring your A game when you play them. Notre Dame in the top 10 is a joke. It's funny, Drummel, if you say that, but I've been seeing a lot of people hype up Notre Dame this year. There's a lot of people that think Notre Dame could get it done this year. They think that's the most talented roster they've had a long time. I love Notre Dame's coach. Two Notre Dame games that should be interesting is one versus Miami and then two versus BYU. That's going to be a huge game for the conference guys, is BYU and Notre Dame when they play in October. That's going to be a huge measuring stick for this conference, especially with BYU, who brings back basically their entire roster. That's going to be a really interesting game. But I think Notre Dame could be a really good team this year, Drumwolf, based on reports. Coop said Notre Dame is going 12-0. Coop said Arizona is the most overrated team in the Big 12. Yeah, Coop, I'm actually going to the Arizona game this year. I don't know how to judge them. Yes, they have Noah Fafita, but I like West Virginia's chances in that one because we are home, and it's going to mean something to Rich Rod because he used to coach at Arizona. So I like West Virginia's chances in that one. Trey said everyone forgets we beat Houston after their strength coach passed away. I think we've played that game 1 week earlier. We would have lost. That's a good point, Trey. You know, they did lose their strength coach to cancer in that week, and that is a great point. I also think too, though, Houston's home field advantage is not great. Their fans do not show up for their games. You know, there's a lot to do in Houston. So I also think if the fan base would have done their part and showed up, maybe you will that team to a win. That definitely was heavy on their hearts that day, and I think it's a good point. I also think that you're going to get the best effort from Houston this year when we play them again because we beat them and upset them last year. You're going to have a dialed in and focused Houston team when we play them later this year. I do think that Wegman's not that great, though. I think a lot of people are hyping him up, and based on what we saw last year, I'm not seeing the hype. Drumwolf said Indiana should be number one. I agree. You know, I think until they get dethroned, they should be number one. I agree with that, Drumwolf. Ohio, Texas is overrated. Yeah, Texas has been doing a lot of gum flapping this offseason, and they've been really confident, and it's going to be interesting what they do. They play Ohio State in week 2, so that should be a nice measuring stick game for them and see what happens there. Which almost said he's going to be pulling for BYU. Yeah, BYU is an interesting team. They brought back Satake, obviously, and Bear Bachmeyer, and they have the Big 12 Conference Offensive Player in the Year in LJ Martin. So they're an interesting team. I'm pretty glad we're not seeing them on the schedule this year, although we would have had them there. Hoover isn't that good, and we are going to be a trap game for Texas Tech, not going to lie. Yeah, all good comments, guys. You know, those comments tell me that you guys are ready for football season. All right, let's talk about the Big 12 and the patches. I haven't got to talk about this yet. Don't love bashing the conference, but one of the things I want to do here is be honest with you guys about how I feel and just the perception of the conference. And I'm not sure about you guys, but I feel like recently the Big 12 has taken it on the chin recently with PR. And I think for a long time, I've always had to defend the Big 12. You know, when we first got to the Big 12, everyone would clown our defenses and say it's not that good. And I always was pounding the desk like, this is the third best football conference. You know, there was times when we had our brands that we could have made a case for the top 2 conferences, in my opinion, before realignment happened. But as time has worn off, I feel like the stock of the Big 12 has just gone down and down and down and down, and it continues to plummet with some of the recent moves they've made. And just looking at if the Big 12 is a stock, I think everyone would be selling it because they've made some really bad PR moves. And I'm going to get into all those right now. So let's start off with the one that is most recent, and that is the Monster Patch, right? And they do not look good. It's a little frustrating because as fans, we always knew that the patch was coming. Like, we knew as West Virginia fans, we're educated fans, the patch was going to come. To stay up with the Joneses, to be on a competitive level, we knew that each team would have a patch. We didn't really know that the conference had plans to do a separate patch. That's not something that we knew until Big 12 media days. And I think it caught us off guard a little bit. And then all of a sudden, you have 2 patches, and then it kind of looks like a NASCAR uniform, and that's something we don't like. We are traditionalists as college football fans. We like on-campus games. We like the uniform to be traditional, right? And we love watching our teams play in those uniforms. It means something to us. When you see a Mountaineer uniform and you see the team run out, it means something to you. And then you kind of spoil it when you put too much on it, right? I'm not against like branding. Like, I think, you know, having a Monster logo on the field is fine. Like, it's inevitable. Or in hockey, you have it on the boards. Put it somewhere on the field, fine. But the way that this was done and for how little money they're getting was embarrassing, and we get clowned for it. And yes, we're making, you know, a few $1 million off of it, but is it worth for the perception of the conference. Other conferences I haven't seen have logo patches because they're probably not as desperate enough. This comes off as a desperate move. I think it's a bad look for the Big 12, and it kind of spoils the uniform. So that is definitely there. Trey Edwards said, I don't know if you've seen Bagman's post earlier, but financially the ACC is better off than the Big 12. Going to talk about that, Trey, in a second. So hold that thought because we are going to get into that. But yeah, ultimately, this was a bad look for the Big 12. Eventually, we might get used to it. But again, it just takes up a lot of space on the uniform. And for the money number to get leaked out about that, it was a bad look for Euromark. And I think people are not going to stop talking about this for a while. We might get used to it, but I think it was an embarrassing moment for the conference if we're just being transparent here. Now, this is a few months removed after this disaster, and I'm not sure what's worse. I put a question out on X the other day. What do you guys think is worse? Was the LED glass court worse than the Big 12 patch? Because they're both terrible PR moves, in my opinion. I didn't hate the LED court originally, but I don't think it was the right move to do it at your conference tournament. I'm not sure if you can do like a host a Big 12 basketball like preseason tournament or show this off in the summer or do other things, but having it in the conference, in the middle of the conference tournament, and to have it fail, and this failed, let's face it, it failed. When you have to swap out an LED court for hardwood in the semis, that is bad PR. And that was an embarrassing moment for the Big 12. And again, when you look at a conference that's trying to prove itself and show that they are one of the big boys and can compete with the other conferences, when you have PR back to back like this between the monster patch and the LED court, it's really going to be hard for other conferences and other teams to take your conference seriously. And that's just the vibe I'm getting around the Big 12 right now, unfortunately. Up next, I have the Nelly halftime hype concert. Now, I apologize to any Nelly fans. Listen, I am 34 years old. I definitely listened to my fair share of Country Grammar and Nelly back in the day. But I remember when this came down and Brett Yormark was hyping up at his press conference about there's something big happening in the Big 12. Like, we're going to have a huge announcement that's going to send shockwaves through the nation. Then they announced it, and it was Nelly. And again, Nelly's music's fine. I think he's a entertaining artist. But when you hype up something that much and it ends up being a guy that was really popular in the early 2000s, it just doesn't hit. If you're trying to get a younger generation in there, they're not going to care about Nelly. And I think, again, it just was like an underwhelming thing. I used to be in sales, and you don't want to overpromise, right, and underdeliver. You want to do the opposite. And I felt like here we were kind of getting hyped about something that wasn't deserving of all that hype. Trey Edwards said the LED court was a great idea, but it didn't pan out like they thought. I wish they chose a court color that wasn't such an eyesore. Yeah, and the hardwood court too is kind of ugly too. But I will say this: I do give them credit for switching, even though it's a bad PR move. After listening to the coaches, they did make a change, and they weren't so bullheaded on that. Drummel said I prefer on the field and stadium. Yeah, I think everyone would say that. If you told the Mountaineer fans, hey, there's going to be a Monster Energy logo somewhere on the field or the stadium, they would say, okay, they understand the nature of that. But once you take something as important as the uniform that we identify with, I think it's a whole nother issue. And he said that court was weird. Yeah, it definitely was a weird court. Could you imagine being a fan, who's been watching college sports for a long time and waking up in 2026 and seeing LED courts that fail, patches on jerseys, the payment of players, the players that can leave the NBA and come back to college? You'd be like, what am I watching? I think that's why it's turning off a lot of people, even though the ratings say different. Drummel said, how about some rock bands? Yeah, I agree, man. I think rock bands are awesome. I actually think like a Post Malone would be great for Big 12 media halftime. He's a Texas guy, and he's someone that can do country and he can rap, and he's someone that's hip around young people. I think someone like Post Malone would be like a great fit for a Big 12 halftime performance. All right, let's talk about some other things that have not landed well for bad PR for the Big 12. And it goes back to Trey Edwards' point about the revenue. And for a while, it was like, all right, Big 12 is number 3. Okay, we can survive. But we've gotten passed up. If you look at this, out of the Power 4 major conference athletic conferences, the Big 12 ranks last in total revenue, bringing in $610.9 million. According to recent tax filings, it sits behind the Big 10 at 1.47 billion, SEC 1.11 billion, and ACC 826 million. And then we're at 610. And it just feels like that gap is getting further and further. And then you have to really ask yourself when you see these numbers, like, we have to be aware, like any team, including us, if we ever got offered to go to another conference, I think first off, if it's the SEC and the Big Ten, it's a no doubter you're going just for the payday alone. And if it's the ACC, especially us, you'd have to at least think about it, right? So I think any team behind closed doors, any brand is trying to somehow successfully get their brand valuable enough to make the change. Now, that could get changed with the legislation about the Protect College Sports Act and capping conferences at 19 and being on a 5-year probation period if that passes. But I do think that there are people behind the scenes that would be aggressively or at least considering leaving a conference if it continues to go this trajectory. Embarrassing PR moves, fourth in revenue. You would be crazy not to consider what life would be like if you went to another conference. All right, let's get into the other embarrassing things that have happened. That's just on-field play recently, guys. You know, I am one who pounds the table about the Big 12 has the most parity. And from top to bottom, there's no easy games. Every game is a struggle. And we can say that all we want. And I think it's true. I think it is tough. I think you can make an argument that if you look at our schedule sometimes, it's as challenging as anybody because there is no get right games, right? Every week in the Big 12, you have to show up. Where if you look at some other conferences, sometimes you might get no offense, Rutgers. You might get a Northwestern when they're down, a Wake Forest when they're down. That we used to have that when Kansas and Iowa State were down, but they've leveled up their brand so much that there aren't too many get right games on the schedule, and so it's tough. We could say that all we want, but ultimately, when the lights are brightest, you need to show up on a national stage in order to get respect. The Big 12 holds an all-time 1-8 college football record, college football playoff record with 0 national championships. And you see the other ones that have done it. The ACC has one with Clemson and Florida State. The Big 10 has won the last 3. The SEC has had a fair share of runs. Where's our championships? Now, we had a run with TCU, and we felt good for about 2 weeks. TCU takes on Michigan, wins, and all of a sudden the Big 12 is coming. And then before you can even celebrate it, you get absolutely embarrassed in front of the country, 65-7. I mean, it almost looked like Georgia played that game on varsity or freshman on college football and just ran the score. But it's almost hard to fathom that a national championship got to that level and it was over within the first few minutes of that game. That was a bad look for the Big 12, even though TCU made it all the way to the finals. The fact that they got beat that soundly was eye-opening of how far the gap really is to the mountain. And then last year, what happened was arguably just as bad, right? And here's why. The score is not as lopsided, but you had Texas Tech, the most dominant team in the Big 12 in a long, long time. I can't remember the last time a team easily ran through a conference like that. And I always said it is the worst case scenario if Texas Tech goes out and lays an egg after being that dominant during the season. Because if they go out and they get smoked by a team, this narrative about the Big 12 being not a great conference is going to stick. And it's going to continue to stick until some of our teams make it into the college football playoff and start winning more games. Because a lot of people see this field, this conference as a one bid conference. You know, if you look back at the AP poll that we showed earlier, there's not a single team in the top 10. And again, if they only take 12 teams, only one team would qualify, and that's Texas Tech. So BYU would be on the outside looking in. So you need to get more teams in there, and you need to perform. You need to start winning more college football playoff games. The college football playoff has been around since 2014, I believe, and you have one playoff win in that time is really eye-opening. And even teams like, Oklahoma struggled when they had a chance. Oklahoma had some chances to win some games but couldn't get it done. And it's been a problem for Big 12 schools for a while now. All right. And then the last thing that is obvious, but we'll talk about it is, the losing valuable brands. I think it speaks volumes to where the conference is. This is not a desirable conference. It is for teams that just came in, right? Like, Cincinnati, I'm sure is happy to be in. When we were welcomed in the Big 12 in 2012, we were excited about it for sure. We felt like it was a nice change from the Big East and we felt like we had a seat at the table. And, I'm sure that schools like BYU are happy with it. Look what it's done to BYU's brand. It's really helped them transform their brand. But for the most part, if you look at what's happened in recent memory, your big brands have left. And I think that's a little embarrassing for the Big 12. Nebraska, great stadium, great fan base, left. Missouri, left for the SEC. Texas, Oklahoma, two teams that you could count on to be your big brands and to have confidence in would wave the Big 12 flag, both dip at the same time. Texas A&M gone, and especially after seeing what they did with Johnny Manziel and how they took off after leaving, they've just lost so many big brands. And it just seems like it's a conference that you feel comfortable in because you have somewhat at a seat at the table, but it's not the same thing as being in one of the other schools. So I think that's another issue as well. Drumwolf said other conferences are top heavy. Yeah, absolutely agree. If you look at the other conferences, they are top heavy, and that's what I've been pounding the desk for. But ultimately, you're going to get judged on how your best does. And until our best levels up, this narrative around the Big 12 will be there. And he said same teams every year. That is true, except for Indiana has leveled up their game as of late. All right, guys, that's all I got. Was on here for about 40 minutes, but had a lot to talk about. There's a lot of people in here, so I appreciate you guys. If you like the show, please remember to like. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Spread the word to your friends about Jersey Ear. Let's help grow this channel as best we can as we get closer to football season. Thanks again for watching and tuning in. We'll talk to you guys next time on the Jersey Ear Show.